Welcome to Canada Bangladesh Social Justice Action Research Alliance. We organize critical and courageous conversations about local and global issues connected to equity, fairness, and social justice. Today, our topic is rather tricky, something that we don't always approach. So, today we'll talk about Dalit feminism and Tagore in questions of caste. And I'm very delighted. My guest is Dr. Anandita, Assistant Professor of English, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research, Bhopal. Professor Pan has written, I'm so sorry, Professor Pan has written a book mapping Dalit feminism towards an intersectional standpoint, and also an article constructing the nationalist subject caste and gender in Tagore's Chandalika. So today we will try to critically approach Tagore's narrative in Chandalika, analyzing the character of the protagonist, Prakriti and Anundo, that how Professor Pan looks at it and analyzes it. And also, we'll try to understand that can we understand marginalized subjectivity using Dalit feminism, or Dalit feminism is only should be limited within the Indian boundary, or how, and also the history, how it has emerged, and why particularly Dalit feminism, and what was the failure of Indian mainstream feminism. So all of that. I mean, I'm sure that Professor Pan has no shortage of things to discuss with us. So with that, Professor Pan, welcome to our conversation.
Thank you so much, Firoz. It's a really great pleasure to be here with you all and interacting on a topic that is something that is very relevant and also very close to my heart for two reasons. Firstly, because obviously I have been working on this topic for quite a long time since my research days as a PhD student. Moreover, being a Bengali and someone who hails from Shantiniketan, this also has, I have, in other words, I have also grown along with this, different perspective as well. So, if anything, I believe that it has contributed immensely in a kind of bringing about a different perspective, a growth and change in me, something that is also very relevant with the changing times. So now more than ever I feel that we really need to have these discussions instead of shying away from them, so as to really engage with all the different angles that are there with reference to certain issues. We can no longer limit ourselves to single perspectives anymore. Like Derrida talks about, we always need to be in the play. So in the same manner, we really need to welcome plurality, and that has been happening actually in many different theoretical spheres and also social and cultural spheres as well. Feminism is one of the examples which constantly gets redirected, renegotiated and restructured and questioned from within as well. So my research actually places these arguments within that very theoretical and social frameworks, where I look at the very concept of what it means when we talk about caste and gender, or for that matter Dalit politics or mainstream Indian feminism, how these movements or how these structures get constructed in ways where they interact with each other and where they are not mutually exclusive from each other. So that intersecting, interacting space is what I engage with. And this was also, the idea behind my book and the article as well. So the book basically, gives a very theoretical overview towards this approach, because there what I was trying to do is basically engage with the discourse called Dalit feminism, where I looked at how it interacts and contradicts the ideas of mainstream Indian feminism and Dalit politics in talking about caste and gender in intersectional manner. And I looked at the discourse in terms of the literary writings, translations, films, and different cultural products, including the movements, the histories. So how things get rewritten when we look at caste and gender from a Dalit feminist angle. And a microcosmic view of it was, the outcome was my recent article in EPW, Economic and Political Weekly, where I looked at the character of Prakriti and her mother as well, in discussing Chandalika, Tagore's Chandalika. So that is the premise basically. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor Pan. Uh, you have brought us into a very important conjecture, I would say, that you had the good fortune of studying at Shantiniketan, and you also have addressed something. Like, for instance, me being a Muslim immigrant in North American country, I see the immense value of scholarship that is written from margins. I see that the epistemology that has rather, if there's a divorce between our lived experiences and the scholarship that we are using to understand our lived experiences, there is a problem. Professor Sushana Zuboff, in one of his recent article, uh, because of the tendency in Facebook and social media, the divisiveness and all of the sectarianism, she said something very powerful, is that we are going through an epistemic terrorism. This is what she is citing. Epistemic terrorism, something that I have not encountered in other literature previously. So my follow-up question to you is that what inspired you to look into, I know that you write in your book, but those of you who don't haven't had the chance to read the book, is that what inspired you to look into Dalit feminism?
Right, so that's actually where the preface also of my book kind actually addresses the question, and okay, I may be referring to all the theoretical terms very frequently because I'm a researcher and a teacher of feminism. So since you mentioned the term epistemic terrorism, which is very interesting, please allow me to begin with a similar term that Spivak coins, which is epistemic violence, where the knowledge categorically gets erased, especially with reference to colonized, for example. So a knowledge from the margins gets erased and replaced by something from the dominant perspective. And this was something that was also the germinating moment of my research as well, because as a student of PhD, immediately after my masters, it was not like we are immediately open to many different areas or many different ways in which where we can explore literature. We immediately have some traditional topics to go back to, and that was also something that all of us, like a long drive, everybody is going, go with the flow, that kind of thing. And it so happened that during my actually coursework in IIT Kanpur, it was incidentally a course on feminism, and my supervisor actually, I came across this article she was teaching us by Sharmila Rege called Dalit Women Talk Differently, which was a reaction to Gopal Guru's article, Dalit, of the same title, which was published in 1998. And after reading the article, and more importantly, after discussing it, our classes were very discussion based. What I realized is a lacuna in my own knowledge, that this is something so obvious, and I have been so obviously blind to it. So that was a very self reflexive moment in my own career as a researcher, and more importantly as a person as well, if I may say it so. uh, so from then on, I realized that this was something that I really, there was, it's very indescribable how to describe it. From then on, there was this urge to really look into something that nobody in my vicinity at least had attempted. you know uh, Again, like you said, that identity, we always come across certain kind of privileges. So I had the privilege not to recognize caste or not to see caste, because once you don't belong to that caste, you don't see the caste happening around you. So Shantiniketan, once again, it's a very privileged small space where you don't necessarily have to see the caste, and the same thing happened to me. So I thought that this was something I that was kind of a, a wake up call. And I thought that this is the time where I can get out of my comfort zone and explore something that is uh, absolutely different from what I have known, but at the same time very very relevant. And that proved to be so, its relevance has grown ever since, and now more than ever we really need to talk about it. So this was one of the inspirational moments, and reggae's article really was that spark that, literally changed my entire research career, so to say, or began it. I should
Yeah,
say that. Yeah.
unfortunately, Professor Reggae passed at her
Yes,
prime, very
yes,
unfortunately.
absolutely, yes, that was one of the very sad moments.
Hmm. Um, Now, so as I'm a Bangali, so when I
Hmm.
read Rabindranath,
Hmm.
I approach it from sometimes a point of uncritical veneration, and not to undermine the immense contribution of Rabindranath in our psyche. And obviously, we can't understand Rabindranath without considering his context, the time, the socioeconomic circumstances around him. So, given that if all of our audiences haven't read uh, Chandalika, I also have to recognize that reading Rabindranath is also a privilege. Not everybody has the privilege to read Rabindranath. So, could you give us a bit of plot of Prakriti's mother, and Anando, and how did you look at it from a feminist vantage point that you further problematized it and critically analyzed it subsequently?
So my interaction with Chandalika happened at different many phases of my life. I came across Chandalika, obviously being in Shantiniketan, you come across the classic Chitrangada, Chandalika, and Shama at very early stage. And initially, the way in which came we came across it was almost like a Nritya Nattu, which is a dance drama, which was performed, and it was traditionally known as something that is very, eye opening, kind of following the Buddhist sort of tradition. So to very briefly talk about Chandalika, what happens in the play is Tagore invokes the Buddhist ideology of equality, where Buddha's disciple Ananda is actually on his way, on his journey, and he comes across Chandalika, who is the watering lady, but and he asks for water, and she says she is a lower caste, so therefore she's untouchable. But Ananda says that nevertheless, I am thirsty, please give me water. So that becomes a very transformative moment in her life, where she learns to value herself, and she really desires for Ananda in more than ways than ever. And that desire leads her to implore her mother to use certain magical powers to bring Ananda back. And initially, for some time, those magical powers do work. Ananda is drawn to her. But then, when she looks at him, she realizes that the Ananda she has been desiring for and the one that is standing in front of her are two completely different persons. And then that is an eye-opening kind of moment. There is supernatural things happen. The mother actually takes the fall, she dies, and then Chandalika's eyes get really open, the kind of awakening sort of thing happens. So the premise for the play is very interesting given the time that it was written, because we all know that Tagore and Tagore's idea of nationalism was quite different from whatever was happening during his time, especially the Gandhian ways and all. And the story or the play becomes interesting because it invokes Buddha as an alternative to the contemporary nationalist reforms, religious reforms that were happening at that time. So Buddha was a vociferous critique of caste, as we know, and he promoted equality among all groups of people. And so invoking Ananda in that context becomes a very crucial moment in interrogating with internal issues such as caste. Because when we talk about caste, it highlights the internal fracturing of the system that we are in, which is very different from nationalism as propounded by dominant discourses, which views only the colonizers as the others, and they want to unite the people of India, predominantly a Hindu India, so that everybody becomes either Harijan, or there are different terminologies for it, of course, but there is a single nation which is supposedly fighting with an outsider. And contrasting to that, we have leaders such as Phule, Ambedkar, Periyar, who have always been highlighting the fracture within. Right? They're saying that the nation in itself, okay, within itself, is completely rotten. So until and unless we repair this nation, how do we actually interrogate or fight with people who have come from outside? So this dance drama actually becomes very interesting, because unlike any of his other dance dramas, so to say, this really posits caste at the center stage. And when I say caste, I mean only caste. And that's where my article really or my research really comes in, because a lot of times, especially with many different ways in which we see certain events happening, we see either the predominance of caste in the narrative or gender. There is always the prevalence of one issue over the other. And how that happens, if I may just expand the discussion a little bit. So as I said that um, Chandalika is one of the characters, which is a Dalit, and Chandalika and her mother, of course. We have two characters here who are known as Chandal, literally coming from Chandal, also known as untouchables, the Shudrati Shudras. And a new life is given to her when she meets Ananda. She really learns the self worth. But in the process, what happens is, we come across a kind of psychological drama highlighting the difference between the spiritual and the material, where we see that the spiritual is kind of represented by Ananda, and the material is represented by Prakriti. And the spiritual and the material tussle is also very much central if we think about Partha Chatterjee or the others who has talked about the very much gendered idea of the material versus the spiritual, public, private, etc., and so on and so forth. So when Ananda says the words that "Jol dao, amake jol dao," give me water, kind of, if we loosely translate it, it kind of poses a challenge to the orthodox ritualistic Vedic Brahmanism by saying that you can give me water, because uh, the idea of casteism is very much rooted in all sorts of discriminations based on interdining, any sort of touch, any kind of even the shadow should not fall on the upper caste people, so the Dalits had to walk on a different path as well. Often they had to wear brooms on their bodies so as to eliminate their footsteps when they walk. So now what happens is, in the story or in the play, we see that of course caste is central, but Prakriti literally meaning nature, that those things become very interesting, where we see that Chandalika's fascination for her, for Anando, is actually going to a very dangerous level, which is not really, often understood. So we have this idea of id, ego, and superego kind of thing. So in Freudian terms, so Ananda embodies the superego, the idea of moral voice, whereas Prakriti can be seen as occupying that, base desire. Okay, whereas yeah, and then mother is kind of trying to balance the two, between the two. So in more ways than the other, we see that kind of the gender ideals are slowly creeping in the play, where and I'll explain this maybe a little bit more in detail. So the idea is that why Prakriti, and why did it not become somebody who was a Dalit man, so to say, give me water. And the idea, and this is where we need to understand the concepts of morality, which is linked with untouchability. So, again, going back to Sharmila Rege's article, we have seen that the way in which Dalit women are, or the lower caste woman's body is viewed, is because of her untouchable character. It's automatically presumed to be immoral, kind of hypersexualized figure. It's considered to be loose. We have characters like Silk Smitha in the film, The Dirty Picture, for example. So the assumption is automatically that some a woman, especially a woman who is seen in public sphere, because women are technically not supposed to go out in the public so as to protect their purity and their honor. So women who are visible in the public sphere, the women who are born of lower caste categories, they are immediately sexually loose and therefore sexually available as well. So it really makes us question whether this representation of immediately Prakriti and her mother was something that connected the two, right? Why was there a necessity to bring in this kind of desirous body of the lower caste woman? Just by seeing Anando, she immediately goes on a very kind of rampage, kind of extreme display of desire. And this is that, I'm using the term very strategically, because it's not admiration or fascination. It's something that is very much physical, very much sexual. It takes that kind of form. So the way in which the play gets rewritten, it really, it of course completely, very prominently talks about the idea of caste, but it downplays the concept of gender completely. And so when we see how it stereotypically represents Chandalika by reinforcing the idea that she is, a Dalit or a lower caste woman is automatically loose and immoral, and she needs an awakening from an upper caste man. That automatically leads us to question whether this play is consciously or unconsciously reproducing the same old, stereotypes that are out there. And this is basically where I placed my research as well on this play, because when we read it for the first time, obviously, as you mentioned, uh, having access to these kind of writings is also very different. The languages are very different. This is not the Bangla that we often speak in daily life. So to read and understand the different underlying meanings, uh, we also need to see. And when we are reading it, as I mentioned, as a child, we read it in a very different manner compared to when we read after having all these epistemological tools with us, that how to read caste, how to read gender. So this is basically a very brief kind of overview of the article. Yes.
Hmm. Hmm. Mm. Now, other than Chondalika, let's say, how do so far from your reading and from other bodies of knowledge, where do you think Rabindranath stands when it comes in the questions of caste?
That's actually an interesting question, and recently we had been discussing Ghare Baire in the class as part of the course, uh, where Ghare Baire is once again two different kinds of nationalisms that we see represented there. One is the militant nationalism, another is much more subdued kind of nationalism, which believes in the benefit of the people rather than anything else. And the idea of religion also becomes very very important there. And as we know that this is where probably some of my assumptions will also come in, because considering that he was a Pirali Brahman, which were a category which was not really the dominant Brahmin, so to say, and who were quite because of their friendliness with Muslims especially, there were marriages were also not really allowed among the upper castes. So not the upper caste Brahmins were not really interested in getting them married to the to this family, and to the Tagore family, and they started living in Jorashaku. This is like the basic history that I'm talking about. So in his writings, what I realized is, of course, he was not in favor of militant nationalism, but he was not really in favor of Gandhian nationalism either, which had completely incorporated all the people as Harijan, while erasing some of the the internal differences that were within. So his answer to it was probably in Shantiniketan, the idea of Brahmo Samaj, that idea that is propounded, where we see that there is something that is much more than idolatry. We don't really believe in idols. We go for a higher power. Even now, we don't have any idols on campus. Also in Shantiniketan, we don't have any traditional pujas that also happen within the campus I'm talking about. So no Saraswati Puja or Durga Puja, and we have grown with that knowledge. And every Wednesday, instead of Saturday Sunday, we used to have Wednesday holidays, where we used to start our day with upasana in a place called Mondir, which is translated temple, but which is basically a house with colored glasses without any idols inside. So it's just a structure where just people just sing. But in the practice, however, the idea of Brahmacharya, interestingly, is, in my opinion, very much casteist in nature. Also because who all have access to this kind of higher level sort of thing. And we have to remember that in Bengal, especially West Bengal, nationalism itself was a product of the upper caste people, and it was very much controlled by the upper caste as well. All the major leaders that we know were upper caste. If we think about women's so-called emancipation, that question was also for the upper caste women. So caste was not really taken into the account at all. And even if we think about the way in which contemporary Bengal is working as well, caste is a very negligible sort of aspect, except for the tremendous amount of writing that is happening by especially Bengali Dalit writers, and interestingly those who came from the East Bengal, or now Bangladesh. And we also have the tremendously enriching history of the Namashudra movement, which is also not a part of nationalist movement at all, because they said no to it. And there is a very interesting history where during the second, like Bongo Bongo, post Bongo Bongo, when another partition was happening, so the nationalist leaders asked Namashudra for their support, but they said no, and they supported the Muslim leaders, so which caused a lot of tussle in between. And they actually supported the upper caste people actually supported the split, the partition, so that the Muslim population can be sent to the other side, and this remains as a Hindu majoritarian area. So definitely it's a very tricky question. That's something in Tagore's writing we get to see it reflecting occasionally, but does not really take a complete form, I would say.
Hmm. Now, this is a very tricky question because, particularly when we try to, when I talk to my friends from the global north, um, I often challenge them not to adopt a romantic attitude to understand the political landscape of the global south. And also, we do have to recognize that from the global south, people who have established themselves in academia in the global north, be it Oxford, Harvard, Princeton, what have you, um, they don't, I don't think they adequately recognize the fracture. uh,
Yes.
caused by caste. So
Yes.
it almost feels like the upper caste intellectuals from the global south coming to the global north still are grappling. I'm not saying everybody,
Mm.
um, still grappling to come to terms with the fact that it is not only a colonial oppression that they are writing against, it's also the internal. And here I find it very useful, quoting Derrida, the translation of Spivak, is that there is nothing outside the text. I
Yes.
mean,
Hmm.
everything within the
Yes.
text.
Yes.
So, understanding the nature of capitalism, understanding that capitalism cannot operate without, and I'm using the work of Cedric Robinson here, racial capitalism, um, and also subsequently one of the other very notable scholar, African American scholar, feminist scholar, Gilmore, Professor Gilmore. She says that capitalism, all of capitalism is racial capitalism. So I'm trying to understand that in global south, what we're seeing right now, again, you don't have to speak to it if you don't feel that you don't want to speak about it. I certainly am using my uh, presentation carefully. That way I'm actually phrasing the question. So in India, we see right now a very sectarian politics, very divisive politics. Um, we see that the right wing Hindu extremist agenda, and very publicly used,
Yes.
they're not hiding. And I was
Yes.
reading up on um, recently love jihad. That literally confounded me. That literally confounded me. I couldn't. I was like, I was sort of like, obviously, I grew up in Bangladesh. Obviously, I grew up in a village also, so I'm not familiar with all of that. That is sort of confounding me to understand the depth of its influence. Now, could you tell us that, given and also based on your book, Mapping Dalit Feminism, is that the current sectarian violence, communalism, um, to what extent, um, why Dalit feminism needed to evolve? My very shallow understanding is that the mainstream Indian feminism was not looking at the intersection of caste and gender. But how is Dalit feminism relevant to theorize the ongoing political, economic, sectarian, religious based violence that is happening in South Asia overall?
Right. So, this will require a little bit of introduction also, how
Mhm.
Dalit feminism evolved and how it has been contributing as well. So, maybe I'll just give some examples as well
Mhm.
while I speak. So, as you very rightly pointed out, when we think about Dalit feminism, Dalit women were visible in movements from the Ambedkarite period. Even before that, we have Savitribai Phule and all the others, but they were not really recognized in as part of feminist movements in India. And it would be wrong to say that Dalit feminism started in the 1990s, because it's not completely incorrect, as autonomous organizations definitely came up during the 1990s. But the question of caste and Dalit women's expressions were there much before also. Even before that, we have Muktabai, Tarabai, all these people writing, Savitribai writing things. We have ancient writings like Chandidash and Rami. They were writing about, she was a Dhopa. So all these people writing about their, wishes, desires, and their own social and cultural conditions, so to say. So when feminism or even Dalit politics emerged, as a political force, political social force, more often than not, it was class which was mostly, a matter of interrogation. And there are various reasons also, and the most important reason is that, first of all, when we think about class, uh, let's say we are trying to, this is something that the left movements have seen both in Bengal and the Telangana movements in different parts of India, actually all the farmers movements and all. Whenever there is a call to unite people from different classes, one can assure a much larger gathering. And class is much more vertical, you can rise up in class, whereas caste is horizontal, where there is no movement per se. Even if one earns money, there is no movement at all. It's a stagnant kind of zone. And what happens is, the reason why caste did not and does not get much prevalence, also because of the stigma attached to it. Because one assumes that if one talks about the caste, that's stigmatizing as well. We have Om Prakash Valmiki's writing Juthan, where he hides his caste in order to mingle with the friends, for a very long time. Later on, of course, he realizes that it's a futile task to even change the surname or hide it at all. So in this context, when we think about Dalit feminism, uh, one recent example would be, the movement led by Jignesh Mevani before he joined Congress, of course, which was again based on the classic, Marxist title like slogan, which is "Land to the Tillers." And one event that happened there, which was a quite recurring thing, which Dalit women had experienced earlier also. So when one Dalit woman activist tried to get on the stage and talk about, certain issues, she was pushed down and said that your issues do not really matter. Those are not primary issues. We don't need to go into things that don't really matter. Caste is more important than gender. Now this has two impacts. First of all, it once again, just like discourses regarding black politics or race, which constantly devalued the issue of black women by pushing it as something that is private and not really, that is something that is more immediately concerning. Just like, black feminism, Dalit feminism in fact invokes a lot, derives a lot from black feminism. uh, so it constantly interrogates or struggles between two types of patriarchy, as we call it. One is Brahminical patriarchy and another is Dalit patriarchy. We can think about two forms of patriarchies. So the perspective of,
Just
yeah,
sorry
yeah,
to
absolutely,
disappoint.
yes, no
Just to
problem.
be clear,
Yes,
so
yeah,
here the Dalit women are
yes,
facing, I mean, double whammy. First, you have
yes.
to deal with Brahminical
Yes,
patriarchy,
yes,
and
absolutely.
underneath, and also I also want you to recognize the fact that a lot of people from lower caste, scheduled caste, they, in order to escape from the caste-based oppression, they converted to Islam.
Yes.
But then they have escaped caste, but they have not escaped class. Even after converting into Islam,
Hmm.
in the the mobility is not all that simple, and um, it's also the blatant denial of existing social hierarchies, structural
Hmm.
violence against
Hmm.
marginalized people in the name of nationalistic euphemism, very exhibitionist unity, not essentially
Yes.
unity in reality. Could you also
Yes.
speak on the fact that how Dalit women, marginalized by Brahminical patriarchy
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
also by
Hmm.
their own people from the own caste, the
Yes.
men from the Dalit communities?
Hmm. 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 Absolutely. So, since you invoked the conversion also, a similar example is there in the southern part of India, where due to the missionary influence, many Dalits actually converted to Christianity, but then casteism continued even there. So there are differences between Syrian Christians, and the terms are very interesting. They're called Pudu Christians, so always a little low. So if women have names called Teresa, they will be called Terida. These are Malayalam names. So we see that that hierarchy really continues. And so this was just to give an example of how caste and religion, this is an area which is not really explored, and which even I did not explore much in my book, but something that I'm currently working on actually. So the interaction between caste and religion is very much strong, and we cannot really reduce it only to Hinduism per se. What happens is, in the Indian subcontinent, the Brahminical casteism has filtered out in all the religions that are out there. So it's not visible in, for example, Christianity outside the subcontinent. They don't really have caste, but the question really is, why did the missionaries not do anything about it? The apparent egalitarian, religion, Christianity, which promotes egalitarianism, why did it really promote, like retain the caste differences? And there are very, very, base political things underlying it, because they really needed the support of the upper caste. So anyway, that's one thing of, why we bring in religion as well. And on the topic of Brahminical and Dalit Christianities, a lot of Dalit patriarchies, the Dalit patriarchy or the Dalit men claim that, many of them, that even if there are evidences of violence against Dalit women, it's only happening because they're trying to emulate the upper caste or Brahminical patriarchy. So, for example, I'll give you an example. In Baby Kamle's book, The Prisons We Broke, she writes how her father used to confine her mother within the house, so as, because he was trying to copy the upper caste people, so as to retain the honor, of the family, because women who stay within the house are honorable women, whereas women who go outside are dishonorable or immoral and loose women. Hence the, going back to the gay's article. uh, so that is one way in which, basically there is a very famous writing by Challapalli Swaruparani, where she really identifies how, this is one way of getting rid of the blame that there is anything called Dalit patriarchy. But Dalit women writers especially have repeatedly talked about how Dalit patriarchy does in fact exist, and there are many forms to it. Physical violence is obviously, one of the ways, and one of the things that we can claim is that many people have told me that, okay, upper caste men also beat up their women, so what is so exclusive about it? Now, this is, I feel that there is no point in saying that none of the violences are good actually, but just to give an example of specific types of violence maybe. So again, going back to Baby Kamle's book, she writes that, if a Dalit man suspects his wife of any kind of affair, or any, the wife runs away because of the tremendous torture at the in-laws house, if the wife is caught, her nose will be cut. And cutting the nose, and the reason is that it serves as, the purpose is to serve that this woman is visibly a dishonorable woman. So it's a visible marker of ownership over the woman, just like we have, sindoor and all sorts of different kinds of bangles that we wear after marriage, which are marks of ownership, that now you are owned by this specific person. So similarly, cutting the nose is one way to show that this woman had done something wrong, and therefore the husband has actually, executed the punishment. That's one step. By extension, what happens is, the Dalit husband or the Dalit, in-laws family also proves their masculinity over the woman's family, the wife's family. So the men in the wife's family, which is the wife's father and brothers, they undergo a kind of emasculation. So Dalit woman's body really becomes the site on which this violence happens at multiple levels. So at the upper caste, interaction with the Brahminical patriarchy, where Dalit women is assumed to be sexually available. We have so many, examples, which are practices which are still happening. Different forms of Devadasi system, Jogini systems are there, where Dalit women are often.
Sorry,
Yes,
Professor Ban, could you
yeah,
speak
yeah,
to Devadasi system? I mean, for
yes.
the audience who don't understand the Indian context.
Yeah, absolutely. So Devadasi system is, or was a system. It still, like survives in many different names also. So was a system where, girls were given, offered to the god, and in this case, usually Dalit girls but what happened in reality, where they were completely sexually exploited by the priests. And there are many different ways in which it still functions. The Jogini system is there are different names, but it still happens. So this is briefly what the Devadasa system
And it
is.
is also
Yeah,
romanticized through many songs
absolutely.
and poetry. And
Yes.
also, I mean, sometimes what happens, let's say again, this is what I tell my fellow researchers from the global north, that don't romanticize it. So let's say, if you think about the very exemplary solidarity of the Dalit men with Dalit women, let's say think
Hmm.
about mulakaram, the breast tax,
Yes.
is that
Yes.
the husband stood by the woman's audacity to
Yes.
defy a structure, or
Yes.
defy
Hmm.
structural violence, and then he also gave his life by jumping into the fire. Could you
Yeah.
also speak to those who don't understand the context of mulakaram, or the breast
Yeah.
tax,
Hmm.
and there the role of caste in that context, please?
Absolutely. So, again, talking about romanticizing things, one example really comes into mind, which is when we talk about village as something that is pristine, beautiful land. And, Om Prakash Valmiki says that this is just a muck-strewn area where pigs are roaming around, right? So, that's just something that immediately
The
came to my
reason I'm
mind.
laughing, because I was born and raised in a very, very
Yes.
remote area.
Yeah.
And I was talking to a friend just a couple of days ago, and my friend was telling me that, whenever I have gone to village, I have find the people in the villages are so simple, so caring, and etc. And my friend comes from pretty good privileged background. And I was telling my friend that, you see, privilege has a blinding effect, because
Yes.
the moment
Yes.
you have gone to village, you have gone there with so many social, cultural, economic,
Yes.
political privileges, that, let's say,
Yes.
your name is, I am learning recently that how, based on the last name, you can understand whether
Hmm.
this person is Brahmin or not. Like, I
Yes.
didn't know
Yes.
that. Like, for example, my last name, you will
Hmm.
understand that, comes from the scheduled caste, is
Hmm.
that, my last name was my father's, and there, obviously, because of the
Hmm. Hmm.
conversion, uh, is Mondol. Now, Mondol, you
Hmm.
understand that Mondol is, a scheduled
Yes.
caste.
Yes.
I didn't understand why my oldest brother, in his wisdom, and I'm saying it in shame and with pain, and with a lot of that, he started saying that, we should lose the last name Mondol, because when you apply for a job, when you
Hmm.
see that last name,
Yes.
it seems like, and this is why I say that you can escape religion, but then
Yeah.
again, there is farther. I'm sorry that I didn't mean to be
Yes.
be personal. So this is why I was laughing, that
Yeah, yeah,
romanticizing village.
exactly. Exactly, yeah. Only you need to really live there in order to understand. Again, the difference of perspective. Are you viewing from the top, or where are you? That kind of thing. So, then now going back to the breast tax or mulakaram, which is also linked with, the myth of Nangeli, or the story of Nangeli, which had a very nice, picture series, I believe, in Facebook. It was released. So, Nangeli's issue was basically in the land of Kerala. There was, breast tax, in the sense that Dalit women, in order to, if they were supposed to keep their upper part of the body bare. That was the idea. Only upper caste women were allowed to cover their breasts. And there is a character called Nangeli. We are not sure if she's a reality or she's a mythical character who is there in history, and she has become an extremely inspirational figure as well. So, she covered her breasts, and every month or so, the people used to come, the upper caste men, to collect tax, breast tax, and she denied to pay any tax. So she cut her breast and gave it to the people, and she died right there by bleeding. And as the story suggests, this was one of the first instances of a Dalit woman standing up for her own right to do whatever she wants with the body. So, we see that the inherent contradiction, if we can say, in Indian culture, which talks so much about covering the female body, was about gazing at the Dalit woman's body as a matter of right, so as to mark that the woman is indeed moral and loose. So it's a kind of, once again, availability, sexual availability, which was practiced by or assumed by the upper caste people. So this is also one very prominent example of Brahminical patriarchy that we have. And one thing we really need to remember is these forms of like oppressions were not often similar in all the parts of India. In different places there were different ways in which these controls happen. So for example, if you think about breast tax, it wasn't there in other parts of India. Other parts of India have had other types of ways in which women were punished, for example. We also have the very unfortunate and very violent events, real life events, like the Kardanji Massacre, where two women were the Dalit women were gang raped in public and then killed, and her sons were also lynched. So all these are examples of again
And
villages
events of
necessarily. Yeah,
public lynching, sorry, and also
yes,
events of the
absolutely.
reason why I'm bringing this point, public
Hmm.
lynching, is because what we don't see, the psyche of capitalist colonialist psyche, is in the United States. Although the slavery ended,
Hmm.
but the lynching continued, and it lynch, I mean,
Yes.
when I say lynching, it's a very powered, very powerful
Yeah.
word.
Yeah.
So one of the authors that I read very closely, he has been studying dehumanization, that how racialization is a
Hmm.
process of dehumanization. Now, if you look at the history of Black women in the United States, one very prominent example would be Sarah Bartman, is
Yeah.
that how women's body has been fetishized. um,
Hmm.
Black women's body has been fetishized, objectified. And currently, I'm also reading a book that looks into that, how the racialized body, the Black body, one of my very uh, dear and near professor and a good friend has written a book about it, is that the racialization of the Black body and the
Yeah.
sexualization of Black body, that
Yes.
how the Black body is desired. Now here is the interesting part. In that book, the book that I'm referring to, the book is called Appealing Because He is Appalling, and you will find out a striking
Hmm.
similarity of your narrative here. So the professor that I'm talking about, in his early days, and he writes it about his book. So I mean, obviously, I'm not breaching his confidentiality. That he has been molested on many occasions by white women. Now, this is understanding the
Hmm.
racialization
Hmm.
of body.
Yeah.
Is that the white women felt entitled to grab him,
Hmm.
to approach him without even asking his permission. So here, I think the understanding of race,
Yes.
gender, and class, they
Yeah.
come
Absolutely.
intertwined
Yeah.
together. I think
Yes.
I for me, the Dalit feminist scholarship is becoming, and I'm very, very, very new. I'm completely
Yeah.
an idiot,
Hmm.
ignorant in
Hmm.
that area. But that's why I find the similarity. Sorry to distract you.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. And since another example, the racialization of the black woman's body, Kimberly Crenshaw also talks about it in her 1991 article, actually, with reference to the Two Live Screws lyrics, where it was criticized for other reasons and in the court, but it completely overlooked how it completely fetishized and sexualized the black woman's body. So dominant narratives, what do they speak and what all things do they omit? So this is the precise space where black feminism and Dalit feminism also emerged from. And on the topic of public gang rape, this display of in some kind of violence in the public sphere, things that we have seen with Fulan Devi as well. So it again is a matter of emasculation. So in or by showing that kind of power over the Dalit woman's body, what they are really trying to show is that the Dalit men are unable to protect their women. So it undergoes a level of emasculation. and it's really showing that who is the boss here, for the lack of a better term. So therefore the public display becomes a very very crucial part in all the kinds of cases of violence on Dalit women, and which we have seen unfortunately are very rampant in the current years. These public displays, and it's seen as a matter of right, that you're not, as a Dalit woman, you're not supposed to go outside or get education, or you're not supposed to get some kind of job, become financially independent. And this was another reason behind Kardanji massacre as well, where class was also linked, because the Bhotmange family, the Dalit family, was also going higher in class. They were buying land adjacent to the upper caste, landowner. So see how all these things are all linked, and the punishment started with the Dalit woman's body. So that's where the interlink between caste and gender comes in. And it's futile to say which one is first, which one is more important, which one is less important. Really, that is not the question here at all. The issue is we really need to see how caste and gender are very much interlinked with each other. And since you talked about the idea of even white women having access to black men's body as a matter of right, we can go back to Manusmriti, one of the largest rule books which codify each and everything. It's the book itself as a text. If we read it as a text, not just commenting on caste and gender, but it's so meticulously codifying each and every aspect of life, which once again sets the rules of in what ways punishment is set in case of breaching of the rules. So if one upper caste man impregnates a Dalit woman or a lower caste woman, it's not so bad. He can drink some Ganga water, and then he will be fine, or some kind of thing is there, right?
And I'm sorry, I'm laughing out of pain. I'm not
Yeah.
laughing at it.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
also, this is, I mean, Ambedkar burned it,
Yes.
and there is a
Yes.
reason behind
Yes.
it. Could you speak? I mean, please go on.
Mahat Satyagraha, yes, absolutely.
Mm.
So on 26th, I believe he burned, the Manusmriti, the burning of, I believe, was it 26th December? I'm forgetting the
25th,
date
I think.
exact.
That's
25th,
why
yes,
that's the
25th,
day,
yes,
as remained
yes.
as the Women's Independence Day, something like that.
Yeah, exactly,
I don't remember.
25th. So the burning of Manusmriti was, in many ways actually very important, because Ambedkar has written also extensively about the madness of Manu. We have uh, uh, the brilliant book by Sharmila Rege, Against the Madness of Manu, and
Yes.
Ambedkar has also written a lot on the riddles of the Ramayana, where he has talked about Ekalavya and other people as well. So what we really see is that Manusmriti, see, Smritis were kind of books of rules. Vedas were written as kind of guidebooks, which were for ritualistic purposes, and Smritis and Shrutis became ways of codifying all the social practices into rules. So just like I believe Nivedita Menon has this wonderful article on homosexuality. So when something gets codified as a law, what happens is, we are necessarily terming it as either that is valid, or that is susceptible to criminality. Some kind of punishment will be given. So codification has both these aspects, both good and bad. So once some rule is codified, it means you're setting it in absolute letters. You can't really defy it. So that's why Manusmriti became and continues to be such a powerful text, because it sets rules for everybody. So just like I said, for upper caste man who is having relationship with Dalit lower caste woman, it's not a big deal. But if a lower caste man and an upper caste woman falls in love, the body of the lower caste man will be cut into 100 pieces and fed to dogs. It's literally, like that's how it gets written. So the burning of Manusmriti, as in the public, therefore marks visible resistance to all those rules. And we have to remember that Ambedkar was a vociferous critique of endogamy, which is marriage within the castes. He always talked about how we really need to go for intercaste marriages. Periyar has also talked about it as part of his self-respect movement as well. So, again, something that happens in the public sphere, this visible burning of the Manusmriti, therefore marks a move away or a challenge to all these Brahminical Vedic rituals that were there, that have been codified as the norm. We really need to understand that these were norms, these were just practices. Just like, to digress a little bit, we have talked, we know about sati, the sati movement, and we know that sati was not a practice all over India, but by making it as a central question of the nationalist movement, it was presumed to be a dominant practice. And it actually, in fact, afterwards, started in many parts of India, whereas sati was only practiced in few parts of the, Indian nation actually. So, in the similar manner, then the codification of all these rules in Manusmriti served as a means to really, make them standardized, show them that these are the rules, these are what people must follow. And the burning, therefore, marked as, departure from that. And this is why, it's celebrated as a Women's Independence Day. Maybe we should also incorporate, Caste Independence Day, maybe as well,
Yeah.
because gender and caste are very much interlinked. Absolutely.
And let's not forget that what the Dalit communities are up against, which is
Hmm.
Arundhati Roy writes in the preface. I mean, in the doctor versus the saint, is that
Hmm.
uh, Gandhi has defended,
Yes.
dare I say, almost fanatically caste system,
Yes.
and 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 here is and I can only imagine that why would towards the end of Ambedkar's life he would embrace Buddhism. Is that
Yes.
imagine here is a man
Hmm.
who, I mean, he is an intellectual giant dominating, the academic spaces with such towering contribution, but goes
Yes.
back to India
Yeah.
where somebody will not even pour water.
Yes.
I don't know how to come
Exactly.
to
Yeah.
terms with it.
Yes.
So, I
Absolutely.
mean, and then the Gandhi has almost been a deity. He has been
Yeah.
apotheosized, right? That here's a
Yes.
man who has
Yes.
risen to. Uh, could you tell me that, given this current narrative, and we understand that Tagore Simon's contribution, obviously, I mean, there are so many citations that we can give where
Hmm.
Rabindranath Tagore was against the partition,
Yeah.
breaking up of Bengal. Rabindranath
Yes.
understood. And I think that right now, and the reason I say it because the ongoing, very painful violence, what we are seeing right
Hmm.
now in Bangladesh
Hmm.
against Hindu minorities.
Yeah.
And then somebody from India, I forgot his name at the moment, that somebody who thought that it is his prerogative to say that India should attack Bangladesh and take it
Yeah.
over
Yes. Yes.
because the
Yeah.
Hindus are
Yeah.
being
Yes.
and this is not a joke. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, where do you
Exactly.
live? Yeah. So in a situation like this, I am citing two references that I think, and as a teacher, I also shared this with my students, is that so during the prior to Second World War in Germany, uh, Hitler was pointing fingers toward the Jews that all the problems are the Jews, right? And and what happens is at that time, one particular preacher, pastor, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he was not a Jew, by the way. We sometimes simplify. We think that in Germany only the Jews are persecuted. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was trying to wake up people
Hmm. Hmm.
to say that, look, see the ploy that is
Yes.
happening, the same thing that you see that Trump is doing, or
Yeah.
say Bolsonaro or Modi,
Hmm.
that the common pattern in the us versus them, right? So Dietrich Bonhoeffer was obviously arrested and he was sent to the concentration camp. He was hanged in 1945, just I think 2 weeks before the camp was actually liberated from the Nazi occupation. This is what he wrote in one of the books. A book is called Papers and Letters from the Prison, where this is going to hurt our ego. but I'm going to say it anyway. He writes on one chapter is called Honest Stupidity. He identifies that he says that the most dangerous element of the society are not the evil. The most dangerous element, because you can fight evil, you know
Yeah.
that they're the one against you. But the majority, the mass, who are not engaged in critical thinking,
Hmm.
can easily be weaponized, can easily
Yes.
be, co-opted or recruited in sectarian, religious
Hmm.
violence,
Hmm.
not to see the underlying structural conflict. And the same thing, and again, this is going to be hurtful to our ego, is that Berkeley historian, economics historian, Carlo Cipolla, he has written a book in 1976. It's called The General Principle of Human Stupidity. Here, he's talking about is that at any point in time, the majority of the people don't think. But we don't want to recognize it because
Yeah.
of our ego and
Exactly.
anthropocentric understanding.
Yes.
And then connecting it to it, in 1971, there was a memorandum, the famous Lewis Memorandum, which is I can say, the Communist Manifesto equivalent of neoliberalization's manifesto, where he was deliberately designing, wanting to attack education,
Hmm.
attack media. Even he suggested, Lewis Powell, that the textbook that is taught should be surveilled. Now, I'm
Yes.
sorry to go on a rant to give you the
Hmm.
context. To what extent do you think that in India, in the academia, because you are a professor, we are engaging in critical thinking for our students, for our general mass to understand our social subjectivity critically, not just
Hmm.
diving into,
Yes.
oh,
Yeah.
you are Brahmin or you are this. And
Exactly.
also, Brahmin patriarchy is a global phenomena. It's not only in India.
Yeah.
So just speak to that, please.
Yeah. Yeah. So, since we are on the topic of pedagogy, it's best to bring in Paulo Freire, Pedagogy for the Oppressed. So, it's like one of the classics. And, one of the things that I completely agree with you is uh, we really need to differentiate the mass from the educated. Like, just getting education does not ensure critical thinking or critical understanding, so to say. And this is also a failure of Indian education system, and I believe in all over the world the education system primarily often does not go for this critical thinking per se. So when you
And if you
know
connect,
yeah.
if you would like to connect
Yeah.
this to, I think this is connected, that what about the
Hmm.
crony capitalism, yeah, surging in the developing
Yeah.
and underdeveloped economies? Yes, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I'd like to say is, just to give a very brief, historical background of, let's say, how women's studies departments emerged in India. It was post the Towards Equality Report, 1974, 1975, when they realized that actually post independence, women's condition, instead of improving, has deteriorated. So there was a huge gap in understanding women, despite having so many, 5-year plans, so many kinds of, support, state support given to the people. There was not much change, and women's condition was worse. So women's studies departments were established, and many a times, especially I'm talking about the higher education level, a lot of times, what happens is whenever a syllabus is designed. Uh, Mostly what happens is it ends up in just incorporating certain things. So mere inclusion does not really ensure that a complete transformation is happening. So even if things are getting included, do we really change our perspective or not? That's the major question here, because perspective is what leads to critical understanding or critical thought as we speak. So, for example, where I teach, we can curate courses, which is a great thing. So, we can offer our own courses and in a way that we like, so as to inculcate much more critical thought among students, expose them to different ways in which we can look at just one text. So, for example, Chandalika can be seen not just from the caste angle, but also from the angle of Dalit feminism. So similarly, pedagogy becomes a highly problematic zone currently, and something that is not really, explored a lot, because we have so many courses on Dalit studies, on development studies, which includes caste, on women studies, on gender studies. Now, no, I'm not saying that they haven't brought a tremendous change. They have actually, brought about a huge change, but even now what happens is, for example, feminism gets compartmentalized as a subject studied only by women. So if you're a woman, obviously you will be reading feminism. That kind of assumption is always there. Or if it's Dalit studies, I get the question, "Oh, are you a Dalit? Why are you reading on caste?" Those kind of questions. We don't really see them as bodies of knowledge, because in order to, like you mentioned, my own privilege also. Who recognizes gender oppression, and who gets to recognize caste oppression? Those locations of experience are very important, and until and unless we understand these alternative sort of knowledges as something that is very much valid for the mass, unfortunately what happens is the mass, and here I am, again differentiating between just education and critical thinking, there is no conversation between the two. So unfortunately, even now, those two are highly, segregated areas where some kind of dominant narratives get seeped into the brains of the people very easily, even if they are absolutely, having many degrees, or holding sorts of very highly educated in higher positions. They still have those kind of things because this consciousness has not really been instilled in them. And there are many critiques of, which are written by many noted scholars about the school syllabus, the even the higher education syllabus, where we see that there is a lacuna, in the sense of we are trying to just create some people, who are expert in certain skills without having an idea of the society at large.
Sorry, can you hear me,
Yeah.
Professor Pan? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, exactly. Um, to wrap up our conversation,
Hmm.
could you give us some guideline in terms of looking into Dalit feminism? I will give you an example.
Hmm.
Like, for example, when we are looking at Partho Chatterjee,
Hmm.
Partho Chatterjee's understanding of material and the spiritual,
Yeah.
and a sort of confidence that India has never been co opted by the capitalist forces because India's spirituality is unconquerable,
Hmm.
beyond reach. But then, when we go to Marx, we fail to understand that our understanding of Marxist literature needs to be contextualized based on our social location. Um, it seems that because you are a Bengali too, that's what I'm saying, that it is almost unfashionable to be a Bengali academic and not be very well versed in Marxist point of
Yes.
view.
Yeah.
Failing to understand that I don't think Marx understood our subjectivity from the global south. Even one of the main critiques of Marxist work by Cedric Robinson. I mean, it's funny that Cedric Robinson, after submitting his dissertation at Stanford, his committee members resigned from the committee, saying that okay, because his work is beyond comprehension. Because of course, the privileged members of the committee
Yeah.
members, how would they understand Robinson's work? He was an African American intellectual,
Yeah.
an original thinker. Robinson was saying that capitalism's understanding of segregating class and thinking that capitalism has broken away from the feudal system is fundamentally flawed. Even the subsequent social relations, economic, political, and cultural, what have you, is based on that racialization of the
Hmm.
relationship,
Yes.
which is why all of capitalism is racial capitalism.
Yeah.
How would we look at this dialectical social relation from the from the Dalit feminist vantage point to understand our current predicament, where we are, attacking minorities, we are engaging in communal violence, we see what is happening in India, we see what is happening in Myanmar. Could you help us that how Dalit feminism could help us understand our contemporary subjectivity from the marginal, from standing at a margin, not at the center?
Absolutely. So, one of the major focuses of Dalit feminist lens is what it propounds is a kind of political awareness, which is not necessarily restricted to the ontological category of Dalit women. Obviously, the experiential value of Dalit women is definitely recognized in understanding in what all ways violence occurs, is inflicted on them. But the Dalit feminist lens is necessarily a view which helps us understand the ways in which intersectionality is happening in with respect to caste and gender, and this has also been expanded to incorporate caste, gender, and class. And in what all ways, it's like I said with reference to the Kardanji Massacre, is Dalit women who become the first point of contact in receiving that kind of violence or that oppression. So and this model, as I said, Dalit feminism also borrows a lot from Black feminism in terms of inspiration, because similar kinds of oppressive features or maybe intersections are also seen in Black feminism with reference to race, gender, class, and ethnicity, and so on and so forth. So similarly, the way in which we can really look at, let's say, the especially in the global sphere, actually the many ways in which marginalizations are happening with reference to refugees or who are persecuted in terms of religion, class, or many other ways. uh, One thing we really need to recognize is the very idea of, and this is where I talk about intersectionality, where we do not really we should not really see these structures as exclusive to separated from each other. We really need to contextualize them. And going back to your idea of Marxism, like you very rightly pointed out, uh, you know especially in two states of India, we have seen Marxism in very prominent forms. And in both the states, actually, it has failed to address caste completely. If you think about, the Telangana movement, where, the left party was a very prominent party, which said that with the removal of feudalism, all the problems of, class and caste will also get removed. Did not really happen. In the 1980s, in Bengal's context, it was proclaimed that caste is not there at all. Class is the more important factor. There is, you'll easily find it, that speech. Uh, but it really clearly isn't. We have many, many examples of the ways in which Dalit refugees were just shoved off to Dandakaranya. Or, even in Madhya Pradesh, we have a large settlement of Bangladeshi refugees, where you will get amazing Bengali food, by the way. So it's still there. So which really begs us to look at these kind of things in a different way, where even if we are not limiting our perspective only to caste and gender, these lens of intersectionality or this position from the margin can be actually utilized in order to challenge the canon, challenge the dominant structure. And one of the benefits of Dalit feminism, I see, which is also quite different from mainstream feminism and Dalit politics, is that Dalit feminists necessarily believe in the politics of affinity and solidarity. So in many cases for dominant Dalit politics or dominant feminism, it's mostly prevalence is given to gender, class, or other structures, caste and class. Whereas many Dalit women's organizations actually have said that we really encourage Dalit men and non-Dalit women to come and join us, and become our sathis, become our friends. So it's rooted very similar to what black feminism has also talked about, the concepts of Patricia Hill Collins talks about other mothering, or the collective, the concept of the collective, which is also very central to the narratives propounded by Bama, Baby Kamle, Shivakami, all the major Dalit women writers. They have also talked about the collective as opposed to an individual, which is very much a masculinist notion once again. So, we can maybe take inspiration from Dalit feminism in that sense, to really interrogate and understand some of the ways in which margins are getting created all across the world, not just, margins that were already pre existing, but margins that are getting created and reinforced, so to say, and how those margins can also often come together and interact with each other to create certain knowledge from those margins. So the margin is actually, I believe it's a very potential, like a beneficial area to challenge what we know as epistemic violence. So the margin can help us to bring back those epistemologies, to bring back those knowledges from where which were either erased or which were completely ignored from the dominant perspective.
Thank you so much, Professor Pan. It was an absolute pleasure having a conversation with you. And I look forward to reading your future work and continue to learn from your research, and look forward to future collaborations too. I thank you very much, and I also thank our audiences for listening with us, and also whoever will be watching this in future. I wish you good in all spheres of your life. So, Professor Pan, have a
Yes.
wonderful day. Bhalo থাকবেন.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Firoz. Thank you so much.
Bye
Great
bye.
to be here. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.